I thought I was too busy to sleep, to eat, and in the middle of all that success, I landed in the emergency room for the first time in my life. Prior to that hospital visit, I thought I was really healthy. There was actually very little of my gut line that was left healthy.
If you want to live longer and achieve more, you better start taking care of yourself. That's like a foreign concept to people that live in the United States.
Over 70% of chronic illnesses can actually be preventable with lifestyle changes that include self-care. And we're spending actually 93% of our time indoors in front of a computer, driving, screen time, which means we're exposed to very little microbial diversity, just even being exposed to dirt.
What do you mean exposed to dirt?
Being outside, being close to dirt. We're living in the city, we're not getting close to nature.
Walking's been a savior for me. My body is almost saying thank you for this.
That is sustainable. You can do it every day. I take an evening stroll after dinner, helps with maintaining weight control, decreases my glucose spikes. It's sort of a refocus on building the soil and strengthening the terrain of their bodies by eating plants, by going outside.
A lot of these diseases are not caused in the brain, they're caused in the gut.
In the modern world, we go straight to the pill. We forget using food as the spectrum of care, using whole foods on holistic measures to recover from surgery, from colds, pregnancies, from injuries. We're only now tapping into the importance of fermented goods. There's microbiome everywhere, including our brain, which has, impact on our research for Alzheimer's.
Could the fact that you begin to care for yourself a little bit better contribute to your ability to climb higher and achieve more? If you just take care of the one person you're going to spend the rest of your life with, you. Advantage Gold is giving away a free copy of Rogoff's book to anyone who schedules a one-on-one precious metals appointment. You'll discover why gold is becoming the #1 hedge against a global currency shift and how to move your IRA or 401k into physical gold. Tax and penalty free. Get your free copy today while supplies last. Text WIN to 85545. That's WIN 85545, or go to advantagegold.com. Data and message rates apply. Performance may vary. You should always consult your financial and tax professional. All right, welcome back to the show, everybody. So we were just talking about intelligence off camera. I'll just start it out. Let me just set the field for you. My guest is much smarter than me. She's a Harvard Business School graduate. She's an award-winning entrepreneur, and she's got a great book out. I was just asking her, make sure I pronounce this correctly, called Sun and Sugat. And I think I'm getting it closer, is pronouncing that right, but you're going to learn a lot today. So am I. Here's what's cool about today's show, you guys. I promise you're going to learn things today you have never heard in your life before, because her perspective is very unique, particularly in the podcast space. And you're going to hear about how her Korean American heritage sort of changed her viewpoint of life, gave her a perspective that most of us don't have. And we're going to talk a lot today about the Korean art of self-care, wellness, and longevity. So this won't be the same stuff you hear all the time about self-care and living a longer time. Different perspective. So Michelle Bang, welcome to the show. Good to have you.
Thank you. I'm so honored to be here.
So I'm so glad you're here today. And the first question I want to ask you is about walking, because you recommend it in the book as like one of the primary recommendations. And the reason I want to recommend it is, the internet's a very interesting place. I had Dr. Gabrielle Lyon on my show, and we were doing a podcast. Her book was about building muscle building. And there's this offhanded exchange we have where I go, when did walking become exercise? And we kind of go back and forth. We were talking about building muscle, but like everything in the internet, so it ends up being this viral clip. He doesn't think walking's exercise, which is absolutely insane. I think it may be the overall most beneficial form of exercise. So for example, and I want to ask you about this. Like for me, I have a really bad L3, L4. I can no longer run. Walking's been a savior for me. My father had 8 years of cancer. He walked daily as his primary form of exercise. You're going to get the right optimum heart rate, burn fat as opposed to sugar because your heart rate's not getting too high. Flexibility, circulation, all of these benefits come. I've recommended walking as exercise on probably 10 different podcasts of mine over time. But you say there's ancient wisdom also in this concept of walking as exercise. So I want to start there today because it's a fundamental. There's a lot of gym rats. Listen to the show. They lift, they pump iron, they do, sprints and interval training in the gym, but they don't really take walks. And they're missing out on something that probably would extend their life more than any of those other things. Why is that such an ancient practice, and why does it matter?
It is the most common pattern that I actually found across all of the centenarians, all the people that are long populations. The Buddhist nuns actually do it very naturally, in the mountains that they live in. They are naturally going outside with the walking. They're getting close to dirt. They're being exposed to microbial diversity. It does a lot of different things, especially now I've actually transferred, the way I used to go to the gym all the time, really working out. And, one of the biggest things I would say is walking is so easy that is sustainable. You can
Mhm.
do it every day. You can do it for a long time, and it's just very natural. And it's something as simple as getting off of your subway stop and making sure that you're stepping outside. And you
Mhm.
start forming a lot of health benefits if you do it after a meal as well. So I've now I take an evening stroll after dinner, and it helps with maintaining weight control. It decreases my glucose spikes. I am digesting food, which is so important. It's actually, when we study what the Buddhist nuns are doing, it's all about digestion.
I gotta tell you something funny. There's this great lady on the internet, and every night after she eats, she literally calls it this. She's precious. She takes fart walks with her husband. They literally eat dinner, and it's the funniest clips you've ever seen, but she's dead serious about it. And they both look great. She calls them fart walks after dinner. The other thing about walking, which I've never said that term in my life on a podcast before, but the other thing about walking for me is it's almost become a form of meditation for me, even though I'm moving. I don't know if you've experienced that, but some of my best ideas, my most peaceful moments, my body is almost saying when I walk, thank you for this, which is why it broke my heart so much that people would think that I don't think walking builds a bunch of muscles, but I do think it's maybe the best form of exercise overall that you could experience. Do you ever experience that too when you're walking, almost a sense of peace in your body, like your body saying, could we do this more, please?
Yeah, and it's a way for me to actually slow down and spur creativity. I get my best ideas walking,
So do
actually.
I. So do I. Most of my original podcast ideas that I do on Thursdays or these solos episodes come from my walks. That's usually where I get them from. It's almost like my time with God alone. I get to see his creation all over the place, and it slows me down as well. So I'm completely with you. So there's so many things I want to ask you because I didn't grow up like you did. You say in the book, and it should be fundamental to everybody, but like if you actually want to live longer and achieve more, you better start taking care of yourself. That's like a foreign concept to people that live in the United States, even though this show's heard around the world. We like think we'll get around to doing that stuff someday. So let's just start with the basic kind of overall premise of your work in this book. I'll let you go from there.
It sounds so simple, and that's why it's actually so radical. Because in the modern world, we go straight to the pill. We forget to take care of ourselves. I mean, I certainly went through that, when I felt ill. So I'm just going to go back, to my background. As you say, I'm a Korean American, and although I'm a social impact entrepreneur, I ended up training in functional foods and on holistic preventative care through this journey. And I grew up in a world of East West medicine. I was born and raised in Brooklyn. I ended up living 2 decades in Hong Kong. And this is kind of where my story started. My father is a US based doctor who trained at the top medical school in Korea, with something like a 0.8% acceptance rate.
Hmm.
And I grew up in this world where, he exposed me very early on to the practical and holistic applications of medicine, which is so ingrained in our culture. For example, using whole foods and holistic measures to recover from surgery, from colds, pregnancies, from injuries. I mean, think about, when you come out from surgery in an American hospital, you're fed often jello, but that's certainly not the case in Korea. You are fed something that's very nourishing. It's helping the body to heal. It's the idea, it goes back to ancient times, where we are using food as the spectrum of care. So these are, concepts that are very embedded in our Korean culture. And then later, I married into a traditional Chinese family that embodied these nourishing traditions passed on generationally. So over the last 2 decades, my family and I have been splitting our time between Hong Kong and New York City as expatriates. So I live very much in this east-west,
Yeah.
between both worlds, I would say.
Yeah.
And so it's very much lends, my perspective in writing the book and, what I experienced.
That perspective is, obviously pretty unique. I've never heard a podcast with somebody that has your background and your perspective, especially the combination of the three cultures, frankly, that you sort of experienced. The book is cool, guys. So this is kind of the premise of the book. Soil, sun, water, care. There's like this book's broken down into these different parts, right? And it was really interesting for me to learn that there's stuff from like many, many, many years ago, centuries ago, that the modern world hasn't even caught up with yet, that are holistic things that you can be doing for your well-being, your gut especially, from when I'm reading your work here. So let's just start like way back when, and we'll catch up to now. We're going to spin all around this thing today. What's something that the ancient people did that the modern world still hasn't caught up to that we should be doing in terms of our wellness?
So the ancient kings used to be very well cared for in terms of their longevity. The people were very concerned about him and his family living for a very long time, reigning over the kingdom. And what they did was really smart. They would place their kingdoms in areas that were, filled with wild plants, right next to seas and oceans where they can get really wholesome ingredients. But what they did was so smart. They actually used their royal physicians and they worked in tandem with the cooks. So, these are sort of like very simple concepts that we're still not using today. They're taking a look at what the king is eating, how they're feeling, and then they're recording what is happening in the kitchen and feeding him something that's going to help him feel better, recover from something that he's, going through, and to, help him to live longer. And so this was just like a beautiful partnership that they were forming to make sure that the king was alive for a really long time. And, it just, when you go back to the dossiers or royal dossiers, one of the most important jobs is actually keeping and tending to the fermented condiments, which was
Yeah.
meant. And we're only now tapping into the importance of fermented goods, how that is so healthy for a microbiome, which is, really the seed of our immunity. And
Mhm.
we've just, are starting to uncover that, there's microbiome everywhere, including our brain, which has, impact on our research for Alzheimer's. So they were doing that a long time ago.
Yeah.
And we're just now uncovering.
Well, what's crazy about that too is the gut brain connection is something to be honest with you, just even this year, and I've had a show for a decade, that I'm starting to understand how the gut affects the brain, and that a lot of these diseases are not caused in the brain, they're caused in the gut. And somehow the ancient world, the world that your ancestors are from, understood this stuff or somehow stumbled into it. I don't know which one it was, but actually the statistics tell us that they suffer from these ailments at percentages that are way less than people that live here suffer from them. So let me ask you this, and it's a naive question in the beginning, but I think a lot of people won't know the answer to this. What is kimchi, and why is this something that's like more than just food to you? I just want them to know this because it's something I pulled from the book.
It is really part of our cultural identity, I think, as a way for them to get through the harshest winters because there was no cabbage is a really humble produce, which actually has, it's very easy to get. It's very budget friendly, and there's hundreds of varieties in Korea. But what they managed to understand is that when you ferment it, when you start preserving it, add the produce with salt, water, and thyme, it becomes this thing where it's filled with probiotics, filled with really great bacteria, and it doesn't require any cooking. So there's a lot of, culture and tradition around making kimchi. And if you think about, this idea of they are in this healthcare system, which is like beautifully marrying two schools of medicine, this idea of preserving the old ways, which is, if you want to encapsulate it in self-care, what you can do at home with home cooking and taking care of yourself. But also, if you wanted to use advanced medicine, if you were to sort of think about it in a more tangible way using kimchi, let's say you had to take in antibiotics and, it is very much part of their culture to eat kimchi. They're refilling the probiotics that's wiped away by the antibiotics. And so it's just this beautiful marriage of, what is so normal and natural for them to do. So kimchi is very much, it's this little, side condiment that is in every single meal. And it was actually fermented cabbage, basically sauerkraut before the
Yeah.
spice came through.
Yeah, I didn't know that till the book. That's why I asked you, what the heck is it, right? Because, I mean, obviously we know off the rack what it is, but actually its origins, pretty unique, you guys. All right, guys, so it's an interesting time in business, that's for sure. Things are changing. You got the tariff thing going on. Policies are changing. Dynamic stuff's happening. Supply chains might be a little bit squeezed. Cash flow might be tight. If your business can't adapt in real time, you're in a world of hurt. You need total visibility from whatever you need, global shipments to real-time cash flow reports. NetSuite by Oracle, powered by AI, has a business management suite trusted by over 41,000 businesses. NetSuite's the #1 cloud ERP for many reasons. It brings accounting, financial management, inventory, HR into one suite. So you're not switching program to program, trying to find stuff. It's all in one place. I don't even know what I would do without my NetSuite in our businesses. NetSuite helps you know what's stuck, what's costing you, and how to pivot fast. If your revenues aren't at least in the 7 figures, download the free ebook, Navigating Global Trade. 3 insights for leaders at netsuite.com/Mylett. That's netsuite.com/Mylett. What did these Buddhist nuns know that about the microbiome and its health that right now science is proving? What did they know about that stuff? Because I think the vast majority of people listen to my show, they work out, they drink water, they're trying to eat a little bit better. They got like the basics of this stuff, or they've got some biohacker hack that's modern. But the real stuff, the people that are really living a long time, and by the way, everybody, not just living a long time, but living well a long time, know some of these secret practices. What did those Buddhist nuns know?
Yeah, I mean, what you're talking about is health span. It's not necessarily how long.
Health span, okay.
It's not living to 200 years old. It's how well you're living, for the time that you have. What they're doing is they're focused on terrain-based living. It was so interesting when I was starting to go through this research because I had grown up, really afraid of germs, actually, just sort of veering away from germs. But what they're doing is a focus, it's sort of a refocus on building the soil, and strengthening the terrain of their bodies by eating ferments, by going outside. So it all goes back to the microbiome, even something as simple as, exposing yourself outdoors, which is what they do. They're around produce, they're outside, foraging. And, if you think about, what the average person does, we're spending in the modern world much of our time indoors. It's
Yep.
revolved in front of the computer, driving, screen time. We're spending actually 93% of our time indoors, which means we're exposed to very little microbial diversity, just even being exposed to dirt. So this is what the Buddhist nuns are naturally doing. It's a very naturalistic way approach to living life, which
What do
we
you mean?
forgot.
What do you mean exposed to dirt? What do you mean by that?
Being outside, being
Okay.
close to dirt. I mean, we're living in the city. We're not getting close to nature. We've forgotten.
So what do you do? You're in New York, right? So all that stuff about living around the green stuff and the plants right now, at least, I assume when you walk out your door, that's not the first thing you see. Maybe I'm wrong. So what do you
I
do?
think in every city there's trees. You can get close to trees. It's very simple.
Do you do it daily? Do you take a walk into Central Park or wherever in New York on a regular
I
basis?
used to be a gym nut. I mean, it completely transformed, the way I work out, and I feel so much better. I feel better than my 20s, I would even say, and even my skin health. So what I've done is I sweat every day and I make sure that I walk every day. So there is a certain number of steps where I start to feel a burn, I start to feel an increase in energy. And it's completely transformed, my health regime. My health regime. I don't necessarily work. I use weights, but I'm not going, and yeah, it's quite gentle, I would say.
Here's a biggie for me. So remember, the book is Soil, Sun, Water Care. Something about water for me has a calming presence. That's why when I ever made any money, I'm like, if I could live near water, I just feel differently. When I didn't have money, I lived in an apartment. I always had like a little fountain in all my apartments with running water. hydration, etc. What the heck is, I'm going to mispronounce it and you know I am, Bang? These are traditional bathhouses. Is that, pronounce it correctly so I don't look like a fool. I'm willing to look like a fool. Okay, bong. And then overall just water, that whole part of the book. Just take that and go for a little bit.
Bang is the Korean word for traditional bathhouse, and it really is a culture in Korean society. I mean, they are very budget-friendly saunas. It's a complex of saunas. So for just a few dollars a day, you can go, and it's gender neutral. I mean, and age neutral. I mean, children are going with their grandparents, and they're just stripping off their clothes. They're getting down into these bathhouses, going into saunas. And it's sort of like this really fun experimentation with hot and cold, which
Yes.
has so much benefit to our health, but also the skin. So they're starting to learn all these health tools from a very young age, all the way through, their life, and they're bringing it back home. So even if you don't live in you're a jjimjilbang, you can bring it back home into your bath, which is what I do now when I live in New York City. But the jjimjilbang is very, deeply embedded in Korean culture. There are steam rooms, there are saunas, you're getting a massage. Massages are very normalized in Korean culture on a regular basis, which is so important for lymphatic drainage. You get the best and roughest exfoliation of your skin. You come out, with baby soft skin. Yeah, you're just spending time to kind of de-stress. I think stress is not necessarily a bad thing. It can actually, push you to reach your goal. But, chronic stress is actually a problem that leads to inflammation and disease, which is sort of, one of the hard lessons that I learned, along the way. And the jjimjilbang is part of that self-care toolbox where, they're regularly going, if not every day into this jjimjilbang. So that's something that is very normalized in our culture.
Check this out. So preparing for this, I couldn't pronounce it. It's Bong, so I got that now. Although bang is easy to remember if you say it my way. But I got to tell you something. I did some research, and here's a staggering thing. For people that visit a bathhouse once a week over the age of 30, they have a 77% less likelihood of ever having a heart attack in their lifetime. That's a staggering stat. So I'm like, wow, what's that correlated to? There's another study that just came out that said if you sauna 4 times a week, you have a 50% less likelihood of having a heart attack. So it's not just some genetic thing. Culturally, this hot-cold concept, especially the steam hot-cold, has huge longevity benefits. And again, you didn't call it longevity, you called it, what did you call it? It's something jevity, where about it's the quality of how long you live and how well you live. What did you call that?
Health
What was
span.
it?
Health
Yeah,
span.
health span. It's an absolute fact. So let me ask you a question here on this. There's people listening to this who are like, yep, this is cute. I got it. Some of the old stuff's connected to some of the new stuff, and I should be really self-caring here. But I'm in the grind right now, and yeah, I'm going to get around to it. There'll be a point, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, once I have this much money, once I get this job title, once I do this. And what would you say to somebody who's in this like crazy high achiever? When I say crazy, I don't mean it's crazy to do it. I mean just crazy pace, high achiever culture. They're listening right now and they're ignoring every warning sign in their life that they should be taking some care of themselves. What would you say to them based on your own experience?
Self-care is a magic bullet to leading, healthy life, healthy health span. It's the pattern that I saw across China, across Japan. I mean, I was living in Hong Kong for 2 decades, and then ultimately I connected it to my Korean culture. I think what is happening in today's world is that self-care actually needs to be redefined. It's often equated to external beauty, but if you take a look at all of the top medical organizations, it is a medically critical term. It's something that should be happening more often. People just don't know about it. And so if you take a look at the World Health Organization, for example, over 70% of chronic illnesses can actually be preventable with lifestyle changes that include self-care.
Mm.
It's really important.
Well, here's how important it is. I've said this before, but I'll say it again. I'm an example of not doing it. So now I'm in my 50s. I didn't do any of these things. I mean, I've always worked out, lifted weights. I did everything that you would do in the current personal development culture. Lifted heavy things, grinded, ate pretty well. I did these basic things. Didn't care about my gut, didn't meditate, didn't stretch, didn't do yoga, didn't sauna, didn't do any of these things until a few years ago. And you know what happened once I got to in my 50s? Cancer, heart attack, L3, L4 compressed in my back, chronic jaw pain, massive fatigue, which then contributes to your emotional well-being. So a lot of you that are like, hey, once I get a bunch of money or all the houses I want or all the accolades, well, I got all of that. And then I got to an age where I can't even enjoy it. I'm spending most of my time with doctor's visits now. Most of my time with my family concerned about me. Most of my time contemplating, what do I want to do? Because I don't know how much time I have left. Now, I've worked very hard the last 4 years or so on making up for that. But you don't need to wait till you're my age. And if you are my age listening to this, you really need to pay attention to what we're talking about right now, because I'm a product of not doing these things. And that's why I have guests on my show like Michelle, because I think it's that important in your life as you're achieving and growing and climbing that you have these things in place.
I mean, I'm a perfect example of that. So when I embarked on this journey, I was in Hong Kong, and I myself was in the middle of, this high achieving, sort of trying to reach my dreams. I have just launched a social impact startup that was experiencing tremendous growth, winning awards and major contracts. And I was so deeply passionate about what I was doing and managing teams, around the clock. I thought I was too busy to sleep, to eat. And in the middle of all that success, I landed in the emergency room for the first time in my life. And this was such a pivotal moment for me because prior to that hospital visit, I thought I was really healthy. I was just, and later I discovered that the doctors, put a camera down my throat and into my stomach. There was actually very little of my gut lining that was left healthy. So I returned home. It was kind of like night and day. I became constantly ill. And it was just so befuddling to me. And I just started realizing, oh, this has actually been brewing for a really long time in my body because I was just not taking care of myself. So if you can imagine like an iceberg, above the water, everything seems fine. But, what was happening was that the roots of my health was just falling away. Autism is the perfect example of, I waited until my body was screaming, until I landed in the hospital. I needed to do something to get better. So it just was like that aha moment that, well, actually, I used to really discount self-care, but it is really that important for me to do that every day with little steps.
You know what people think, and then I want to ask you, if someone just said, hey, I didn't read your book, what did you do? I want to hear what your answer would be in a second. But, a lot of people, here's what I thought. I'm going to have so much money by the time I get there. I'm going to have special doctors that could fix whatever thing that probably won't come up anyway I can fix. If you're thinking that, there's no such thing. The other thing I thought was, I'm getting my labs drawn regularly. All my markers look pretty good. So a lot of these things that are going on in our bodies that, may prematurely turn on some gene expression, for example, that wasn't supposed to get turned on until you're 85, but you flip it on at 45 because of chronic stress in your body, aren't going to show up in your labs all the time. Because I had good labs forever. Then I got to 50 and I didn't. And these things happened. So what if someone said, well, then what did you do? You had this incident and you're like, well, read my book. But in general, we've covered certain things. But if someone said, what did you, like we haven't covered so far, let's say, what did you do? Main thing you did was what?
I realized that there were a lot of things that I grew up with. And I just started reconnecting the dots that, it was this old wisdom that I grown up with in Asia. So what did I do? I mean, there was a lot of research before, I started writing the book. I started taking steps. I experimented a lot. The book is a culmination of all of the, I'm all about easy, efficient, effective. I'm really busy. I don't have time for things. I just started researching. And so I came home and a couple of things happened after the visit. My husband, who grew up in a traditional Chinese household, he started cooking me healing foods that he had grown up with, feeding me pineapple, for example, because it has digestive enzymes. I eschewed fruit because I was worried about the sugar. I was a gym nut. I just didn't eat fruit at all. And here he was, feeding me pineapples and a lot of nourishing soups. And I just started going back to a lot of the things that I had grown up with, especially my father, who's a doctor, and, the recipes that he fed me when I was, healing, recovering from illnesses. And that was kind of the first step. I started taking a look at the pantry and started cooking. I didn't cook before. I started understanding, okay, I need to start understanding what I'm putting in my body because that's driving the biochemistry. And I started training to learn more about food. So that I think the food was the biggest part. And then the other thing too was I realized, wow, I live on a continent that breeds another way of life. Just I'd grown up with a narrative that, older age was a guarantee for decline for mental and physical decline. And, I started noticing around me that there are a lot of people who are sort of defying age expectations. Just there was a aha moment. I was walking down the beach, when I used to live in Hong Kong, and there was a group doing, laps in the open ocean, and they looked like they were in their 20s. But actually, when you got closer, they all had silver skin. They, got together. They got together in the early morning and they were doing something in community, doing a lot of deep stretches. And I just realized there was another way of life. And I started noticing a lot of people around me doing a lot of things. And I just started interviewing and traveling. So that was the beginning stages. I started with the food and then I started interviewing people and then I started traveling across Asia.
What does the ideal 90-year-old self for you look like, sound like? What does she believe?
I don't think about age anymore. It's sort of like this very optimistic perspective on changing my psychology that is much more positive.
Yes.
I don't, it's not in the equation anymore. I don't have a mental clock anymore about the time is ticking.
Okay.
I feel like I've gifted myself time.
Mhm.
I just allowed myself the permission to just, if I want to go after something, I have a lot of time if I self-care, if I take care of myself. I didn't think about that before because I used to think internally, well, 50 is that marker, everything's going to start going and things are going to start declining. But actually, just watching the average person casually living in Asia, it just rewires how you think about age and what is possible.
Thank you for bringing that to us because most of us don't see that. We've not been there. We don't live it. And I have to tell you something so fascinating that you just said this. At the time of recording this Sunday will be my 54th birthday. It'll come out after that. However, I feel really good right now. And, I'm much thinner and more flexible. I've just been doing a lot of self-care, a lot of stretching, a lot of working out without weight, more meditation, more sun, more walking, more hydration, more longevity stuff I've been putting in my body, just really caring for myself for a while now. And I thought to myself today about the not worrying about aging thing. Literally, I said to myself maybe 2 hours ago, I was sitting there getting ready for a couple podcasts and I went, what if I just said I was 45? Like, what if I just changed the number? It's like such a stupid label that I'm putting on myself as if I'm ticking down to some number where I won't be well anymore. And I wonder if I'm 45. I mean, I know it sounds silly, but or there is no number, but identifying with an age when you get over 30 is sort of silly because there's such a variation of 30-year-old wellness. There's a 30-year-old right now on this planet that is likely to live to 130. But there's another one that's not going to make it to 56, and not because of a car accident, just because of the way they live. So 30 is this bizarre label, or so is 40 in terms of longevity. So it's so amazing that you just said that because I thought the same exact thing to myself today. Like, what a silly thing to do, put a number on this.
Wow. I mean, they are regularly doing things that we reserve for the young, playing with yo-yos, and hacky sack. They're dancing, they're getting together in the park in groups and having fun. I mean, it does not mean sitting idly and, doing nothing in older age. They're really active and doing a lot of things. They're not thinking about their age.
The reason that I also wanted you on is that I want to talk about Korean culture, even Chinese culture as well. there's almost like two camps in the world. There's like the US thing, which is like hustle till everything falls off your body and just accumulate, acquire, climb. That's for the most part. It's not everybody, but that's kind of the culture. And then there's other countries where it's like, hey, 4-hour lunches, achievement doesn't matter. It's everything's about the food and the fun and the celebration. And that's a beautiful culture. And to visit there is incredible. And I'm sure to live there is. What's fascinating me about kind of traditional Asian culture is it is work is important. Growth is important. Education is important. Being able to take care of your entire family is important. Yet, at the same time in the East, so is self-care. In other words, they're almost like both worlds. Would you agree with that? It is an achievement culture, very much so. And it's expected in many families, but also a self-caring culture. It's not either or. I'm right about that, aren't I? Is that true?
Yeah. And, I don't think they use the word self-care. I'm putting that, in terms of an American framework, but it's very deeply embedded in their culture. I mean, it's even things like relationships, how they think about relationships for their well-being. So, there are what I call two schools of medicine. It's sort of, the natural ways of living, and self-healing. But it's also, being part of the modern world and being akin to, all of the discoveries that are happening, in medicine. I would say that, there is a little bit of fading that's happening, with modern culture. There's a lot of, Korean kids who are adopting a modern way of life. The ones that are actually living longer, living better are the ones that are retaining the tradition. That was one of the reasons why I wanted to write the book, to preserve that tradition, to make sure that they're
Wonderful.
still working in tandem.
What would your grandmother think of your book?
I My parents and my family are very happy about the book. They're
Hmm.
happy that, there's someone that's continuing to speak about our culture. I think there's always a point in time where the culture dies in family, if you're not continuing to talk about it, to value it, to pass it on.
So you're probably smart enough to know when something isn't working. And for me, when I'm off, even my cognitive function, I always kind of decide what's going on with my gut. So when there's things going on, like you can't focus at work, your stomach's bothering you, it feels like you've got kind of symptoms like that. Your gut impacts everything from your digestion to your brain function and your energy levels. And so when your energy's draining, you got to ask yourself why. That's why I love Just Thrive Probiotic. Just Thrive is one of the only probiotics clinically designed to arrive in your gut 100% alive. Try Just Thrive Probiotic for 90 days and see how much better you feel. If you don't feel a difference, they'll refund every penny, even if the bottle's empty. You just pay for shipping. Start your 90-day free trial today at justthrivehealth.com and use promo code ED to save 20% on your first bottle. That's justthrivehealth.com, promo code ED. These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease or condition. These statements and information are not a substitute for or an alternative to seeking care from your healthcare providers. What's another thing that's in, let's just say, Korean culture that you think should be in every Western household within the next decade? Should be. Something that we haven't covered.
There's a word called Joeng, and
Yeah, I was hoping you were going to say that.
there's no equivalent in English. It means a lot of different things, like love, friendship, empathy, compassion. It's really a call to action for the entire Korean society to take care of one another. And I feel like that's the answer to a lot of conflict and challenges that we have today. It is so important in Korean culture that it's spawned a whole dictionary of a lot of different types of words, but it's very ever present in all of the K-dramas that you might watch, all of the folk tales. But it's really, it's this idea of, when the country is in crisis, like COVID or, financial crisis, they will come together and help a stranger to make sure that everybody's coming out on top.
I learned that word in the book, by the way. Jeong, everybody. Look it up. All right, last question. This has been so good. This is why I like when these come out on Thursdays, because it's topics. I usually do solos Thursdays, unless it's a topic that I just can't cover. Someone's just far more qualified to do it. By the way, there's people more qualified to cover other topics I cover, but you know what I mean. This one I'm completely unqualified to cover. So if I just threw this to you, like you were up at a lecture and you were taking Q&A, and someone said, I need to help finding balance between ambition and inner peace. almost like Western, Eastern. That's way too, it's distilled down to way too basic of a thing, because I don't think Western is necessarily not about peace and Eastern necessarily is. But the difference, how do I find that balance between ambition and peace?
I think that they can work in collaboration. Just because, I'm finding periods of slowing down doesn't mean that I'm still not, going after a lot of ambitious projects. In fact, I'm quite ambitious. And I have a lot of different plans after the book, for example. But I think the difference is that you just have to make time during the day. I mean, even little periods where you're taking time to breathe for a moment. And I think, it's very achievable to do both.
All of you listening to this, stop for a second and evaluate, take an audit on your well-being as you're climbing. And by the way, could the fact that you begin to care for yourself a little bit better contribute to your climb, as Michelle asserts, contribute to your ability to climb higher and achieve more? If you just take care of the one person you're going to spend the rest of your life with, you, for sure, there's one person that you were born to make sure you're supposed to care for, and that is you. And the vast majority of us have done a far better job of caring for others than we have ourselves. And Michelle's work will help you reverse that cycle where you can at least give yourself some of what you're giving to everybody else. So Michelle Bang, thank you so much for today. I'm very grateful.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
God bless you. All right, everybody, share this episode.